The comparison between the shipping and the aviation industries is a common one, with it often felt maritime lags behind. However, bringing systems over from aviation to maritime has proved to be more difficult than it sounds. But this is something that SITA, through SmartSea, is looking to change. Hi, it's Marcus Hand, editor of Seatrade Maritime News here, and today on the Seatrade Maritime podcast, we are in conversation with Julian Panter, CEO of SmartSea. Julian, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Marcus. How you doing?
Thanks so much for taking the time today.
No, absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Well, I think just to start off, Julian, could you briefly introduce yourself to our listeners and your background?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so I kind of spent, I suppose, the last 15 years working primarily in the Middle East, as you rightly pointed out. Originally working for Lamprell, who are a big fabrication EPC company in the oil and gas maritime sector. We did a JV back in 2015-16 with Aramco, and at that point we started to build a shipyard on the east coast of Saudi, that being called the International Maritime Industries. I was the vice president of business development. I was there for 8 years, and really the role I played was kind of building a lot of the kind of business processes and policies and business development plans for that shipyard, and then did some work subsequent to that on some of the kind of wider maritime development within the Kingdom of Saudi. So yeah, I've sort of been mainly involved across the Middle East, a lot in maritime, mostly in the manufacturing side. So yeah, it's a bit of my background really.
So you've basically moved to do something quite different now then, albeit still in the world of maritime. So what prompted the setting up of SmartSea and what attracted yourself to this project?
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd one, really, because I do see absolutely the benefit of technology. And I think when we talk about some of the pillars of growth within maritime, you talk about sustainability, you talk about technology a lot. So it's obviously one of those core pillars of the future. So yeah, but I was contacted by SITA. I was contacted by the president of SITA for Europe, a guy called Sergio Colella. And SITA had essentially been, I mean, just for those listeners that are not aware, SITA is kind of the technology leader within the aviation sector, and they're owned by 400 airlines and airports, and have been working 75 years in the standardization of technologies around airports, airlines, and borders. So yeah, I was contacted by this guy Sergio, and they had, over the last, say, 10 years or 15 years, started to get some opportunities in maritime just through connections within the governments that owned the airports, or links between the airlines and some of the maritime stakeholders. And he said to me, look, we're getting this business, but I think in order to really grow our maritime business, we need to probably ring fence that work around one single company, and then bring a maritime expert into that company and grow the business. And would you want to come and be the CEO of that business for us? And obviously, when I look at where maritime is from a technology perspective versus where aviation is, I think there's just a huge amount of opportunity. So yeah, it was a bit of a leap of faith, but I think that I'm at a stage of my career where I just wanted to do something slightly more entrepreneurial, something a little bit different. Again, use it as an opportunity to learn more about technology and what goes on within technology. So yeah, it was kind of ticked a few boxes, and obviously convinced the wife that we were going to move from our very comfortable home in Dubai and come to Limassol in Cyprus, which is where I am now.
Excellent. How long have you been in the role now?
Well, I moved over at the start of April, so right at the start of Q2 2024. And then we launched the company officially in Athens on the 28th of May. So I've had 2 full months now in an operational company, but then I've had 3-4 months in total. So it's still early days, so not long.
Be interesting to see how it's all starting to come together, though, and I'm sure it'll be interesting for our listeners to hear about. There's a lot of comparisons. You sort of see this in conferences and online, comparisons between shipping and aviation, especially when it comes to things like regulation and safety. But it kind of like it's just a discussion. It sort of tends to end there. What does SITA through SmartSea offer to maritime?
I kind of break this question down into two parts, really, because it's a question I've been asked quite a lot, obviously, over the last couple of months. I think what you get with SITA is 75 years of unifying the aviation sector. So they've been through that journey of convincing the industry that things need to be standardized. The industry needs to own the overarching problem, which is standardization, one digital platform, commonality between the airlines and the airports and the borders, and how that all kind of is unified. So there's one big vision, which might sound a bit daunting for the maritime industry, but I think you need to have a long-term plan, whether that's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, whatever it ends up being. In the short term, I think what aviation can offer maritime is a range of products that are, let's call it, low-hanging fruit. And what I mean by that is, to give you an example, if I talk with a cruise terminal or a ferry terminal, obviously there's some comparisons between a cruise terminal, ferry terminal, and an airport in the way that your passenger journey in an airport is far more efficient, a lot quicker to go through the different stages, whether it be passport control, whether it be security. But now they have like biometric gates, your face is your passport, and all that kind of stuff. So obviously, when I look at immediate value, there's lots of different individual solutions, let's say, that aviation has, whether it be on an aeroplane, whether it be in an airport or immigration, that you could quite easily cut and paste immediately. But then I say, well, look, the big picture is let's join all that up like aviation has, and unify and standardize. So I think there's those two elements of let's have the long-term vision, which has to be standardization. It has to be one digital language. It has to be unification, partnership. But then in the meantime, why not leverage some of the stuff that works really well in aviation that could easily be put into maritime? Connectivity, cybersecurity, passenger flows in cruise terminals or ferry terminals, so on and so forth. I'm very mindful running this business that I need to keep the shareholders happy. And in order to keep the shareholders happy, I can't not try and bring immediate value by leveraging some of the immediate solutions and offering those to the maritime sector. But obviously the big picture is beyond that. So yeah, there's two elements to the answer. I hope I've kind of explained them well.
I think there's a lot to sort of dig into there, actually. I think one of the things that came through is that a lot of this obviously is actually then to do with the ship and port interface. I thought perhaps you could go into a bit more detail, sort of the primary areas the company's technology can address in maritime, and explain a bit about that to our listeners.
One thing I take for granted, I think you take for granted a little bit when you travel through airports, how everything's connected and how the digital platforms and technology within, let's say, the value chain of a passenger going into an airport through an immigration gate or onto an aeroplane, the tickets on your phone, your baggage gets picked up the other end. I think we all travel so much these days that you don't really stop to think about the complexities involved in that digital or that journey, and how digitalization, standardization, and technology is fast tracking everything. And I think because it happens in incremental stages, you kind of forget, or you take that for granted. Now, if you compare aviation to where we are in shipping, it's night and day, really. If you take, for example, a commercial vessel or cargo ship coming into a port, there is no digital communication between a ship and a port. There is no just-in-time arrivals. There is no digital dialogue between ports and ships. So if you can imagine, there's still, in some cases, 8, 10, 24-hour delays that ships will incur before they go into a commercial port. Imagine an aeroplane flying around in the sky for that amount of time, waiting to get onto a gate, or be able to land on the runway and arrive at an airport. I mean, it's quite crazy to think that we live in a digital age, and yet in an industry like maritime, where 90% of our products are transported around the world and to us from the sea, we're still so far behind on the digital journey and unification of digital languages and standards that you can have, again, a ship being waiting for 24 hours to go into a port. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, of course, and there's still a lot to do. And I'm not entirely sure at the moment what all the answers are. I'm still learning about where some of these blockages are and bottlenecks. And I don't think that just because we're bringing an aviation company into maritime, we've got some type of golden answer to the solution. I think it involves the coming together of lots of the key stakeholders around the industry. And also, if you look at aviation, there is big impact from the regulators and obviously the joining of airlines and the joining of the airports, and it's all kind of joined together. I think we've got that journey to go through in maritime. It's going to be an interesting one for sure.
I like the fact that you admit it's going to be challenging, and it's not like you're coming with a sort of like, we've got a solution and yeah, that's it kind of thing. When I sort of look at those hurdles that you're facing, shipping is an old industry, you've got sort of a lot of legacy systems, and then you mentioned about the regulatory side. What do you see as the biggest challenges that you will face?
I think what you've got shipping and maritime is like one of the oldest industries in the world. I mean, it's very set in its ways, and also it's very competitive, and lots of organizations are very concerned about data and data sharing, and there's lots of technology companies and lots of shipping companies that have started to invest money in their own proprietary technology. So I think the challenge is trying to convince that you can still use that technology but run it through one digital platform or one digital data backbone, which will enable you to plug everything in, and then what gets the output from that digital backbone is a unified digital language, which basically means that we can all work together. But the challenge is, I think it's going to be convincing everyone to unify and to partner. And that's what they've had to do. And if we can use SITA as an example, I mean, they started in 1949 with like 11 airlines coming together to solve this problem of communication and how we unify. So, I mean, they had to take those steps. Now, if you look at what SITA did over 75 years, there's some clues as to how we could maybe start to change the mentality of maritime, how we can start to use some of that knowledge and know-how, some of those experiences, some of those challenges to try and understand what the journey might be towards this position of consistency, commonality, standardization, digital platforms, and ships talking to ports, ports talking to back to the ships. And I mean, again, with SITA coming to maritime, we have this company that's willing to open this like treasure chest of experience and products and software and solutions, and they want to basically bring it into maritime. They're happy to go and talk to the IMO. They're happy to go and talk to the big shipping companies and let them understand and learn from 75 years of doing this in aviation.
That's really good, and I think it's really important. I think one difference that sort of strikes me from what you said there was when SITA started in 1949, aviation was a quite small, relatively young industry. Shipping has a huge number of companies, huge number of ports, and so forth. And it's a highly established industry, so it's quite a different sort of point that you're coming into versus where SITA went into aviation.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a lot easier, by the way, to obviously start with a blank sheet of paper or a smaller piece of information on that blank sheet of paper, or smaller ecosystem and infrastructure. Of course, it's once you've got a very mature, and this is again one of the problems I think you have with maritime. I mean, again, it's a very, very old industry. It's a very traditional industry, and you've got a lot of generations of family companies and culture and history that runs through the very fabric and DNA of our maritime sector, and that's what we all love about it, right? But it's a blessing, but it can be a bit of a curse, because you've got all these legacy mindsets and issues that you're moving into this digital world and technology world, which is becoming so prominent, and it's moving a lot of industries miles ahead. We're suffering because of some of those historical issues. But again, I completely agree with you, Marcus. It's harder to change, a much bigger organization or let's say, much bigger industry. It's harder to do that, but we need to do it because we're in danger of really getting more and more disorganized and getting more and more behind other industries because of it.
Yeah, and presumably you need to interface with those other industries because they are your customers and your partners.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's the other challenge, by the way, because if you look at a lot of the industries that feed into maritime, whether it be cruise, whether it be commercial shipping, whether it be the ports, let's be honest, you've got other industries like the airlines, logistics companies that are obviously moving ahead like they are, and the gulf in their approach and their technologies and the way they do things is going to be so obvious as they interface with an industry like maritime, which is still behind in so many areas. I'm pretty new to it, so I'm very humble in terms of what I know and what I'm seeing. But sometimes a fresh pair of eyes is a good thing. And again, what I see is what I see, and what I hear is what I hear. And when I talk with ports, or I talk with shipping companies, or I talk with digital technology companies, which I have extensively over the last 2 or 3 months, I keep hearing the same problems. Clearly, something needs to be done about it. And if you've got a company like SITA that's basically been the glue that stuck that digital ecosystem in aviation together for 75 years, and they're now willing to say, well, look, we want to do the same. We want to try and help maritime. I think we have a golden opportunity to try and make that happen.
As you say, it's something that this industry needs to do. Now, we've talked quite a bit about SITA. You're based in Limassol in Cyprus. And the other partner, I believe, in this venture is Colombia Ship Management. Is that correct?
So SITA basically are SmartSea's majority shareholder. Colombia are the first, I'd say, anchor shareholder and anchor client of SmartSea. But the mentality of Colombia is that, and again, this is where Mark O'Neill, I think, is, and Mark O'Neill being the CEO of Colombia, as I'm sure a lot of people know, he's a very transformative leader. He's very focused on digitalisation. He talks a lot. If you've been to any of Mark's public speaking or panel discussions, he talks about one digital language and the unification of digital technologies and making shipping industry more efficient. So I think he was the first through the door and saying, look, we as Colombia believe that SITA and SmartSea will be this platform to make sure that we help the industry standardize and unify and partner, and we will become the first shareholder within that SmartSea organization, and we'll also give you all of our shore-based IT systems to manage and all of our ships to manage from a digital perspective. And they've invested or are investing also in the new digital platform we're building. And we'll also be building a maritime data backbone, which will essentially allow us to plug different technologies in and unify. So long story short, Colombia are great because obviously Mark's committed to becoming a shareholder of SmartSea, and he's committed to giving us all of his technology business or technology requirements. So Colombia have become our anchor client, and a great opportunity for us to also develop proof points. Again, look at where we can bring technologies from maritime that make his operations more efficient. We can look at how we can improve his shore-based IT systems. So again, at the moment, we're moving all of our SmartSea technologies into his offices. We're looking at how we can improve his cybersecurity, his connectivity, his hardware. It's all happening at the moment, which is great.
So you got a major sort of base client, in other words, on the actual shipping side of the equation. Would you look to then bring in, say, somebody similar from the land side, like a port or similar?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what SITA did, right? So they've got 400 airlines and airports, and the idea is that we replicate what SITA have done, and they've done that with the airports, the airlines, and the borders. So if you look at how they link all of that together, we want to do the same in maritime. So we want to link the ports with the ships, ships with the shipyards. We want to link the cruise ships and the cruise terminals with the airports. There's no reason why you can't have everyone joined up within the maritime value chain and ecosystem. And I think an interesting one as well, because I think what's maybe some of the listeners are thinking is, well, that's impossible because you've got all these different technologies, you've got all these different software packages. Of course, you've got the data. This is quite far-fetched. And I asked the same questions of SITA, by the way. I couldn't really get my head around how you can have one digital language, how you can have everyone talking to each other. It seems absurd, and it seems risky, and it seems strange. So I was probing SITA on this. I was saying, well, how do you do it? Give me an example. And they said, well, look, imagine, and I'll use you and I as an example, Marcus. So imagine you and I, we both turn up at Dubai Airport, for example. Now, you check in with British Airways, and I check in with Emirates. Emirates and British Airways might use a completely different software system to check us in with. However, what SITA have done is they built the middleware which sits above the check-in systems of British Airways and Emirates. I'm just giving you an example. They convert the digital languages that both of those two companies have, and they send one digital language to the immigration department. So basically, when that digital language or Marcus's information or Julian's information goes to the immigration department, it's one, rather than immigration getting 400 different bits of digital languages coming to them from all the different airlines. So what SITA have done is, and what they do is, where there is already software, already solutions, technology, they will unify it by figuring out how to architecturally unify. So again, in maritime, we don't need to go and rip up everything that's been done. It's just a question of joining everything up. Now, you can encrypt the data. You can make sure that obviously the data is protected. So again, you're not at risk there.
Yeah, I was about to say, it sounds a bit like some sort of virtual translation sort of matrix where you're taking lots of different languages and translating it into a common one. Would that be a
Yeah. I
correct
mean,
comparison?
it's the reason that you have an iPhone, right? We all have iPhones, or we all have Androids, and it's the reason why you can upload different apps onto that iPhone. I mean, the platform's there. Not everything has to be an Apple product. It can be different technology products. I mean, and that's what SITA do very well within the aviation sector. They create this platform where the different segments of the industry can talk to each other. Different technologies can plug into those platforms and make sure that it's joined up. And there's a lot of standardization. I mean, if you imagine, like, even the baggage tags you think about the possibilities. Baggage tags are all the same, right? They're all using the same RFI coding. So if you again check in with British Airways, with Emirates, the way that you read the baggage tag on your bag or my bag is going to be exactly the same. So you can track a bag through that whole value chain from Dubai Airport to wherever it is we're flying. It's not the same situation with container shipping, as far as I understand. So I mean, again, it's this again another example of where aviation is standardizing and unifying rather than making everything much more complicated. But I think in order for us to change, by the way, I think we need to get all the big shipping companies, all the big ports, the IMO, the regulators, the classification societies. I think there needs to be one big consolidated effort, because at the moment there isn't that. There is committees, there is organisations, there is the IMO, there is the CSRA, there is all these different people, but I think maybe someone needs to bring everyone together.
Yeah, which is going to be a big task. I think it's interesting when you do talk about some of the stuff in aviation, because we just take it so for granted. When you mentioned the baggage tags, it's like, yeah, they are all standardized, aren't they? Don't even think about that.
Yeah. The other one I was thinking about, just while you're there, is we talk about aviation, we talk about maritime. SITA talk a lot about this intermodal travel, which is an interesting subject. And they talk about they're doing it with rail at the moment, where you can check in on an aeroplane in, I don't know, Frankfurt or whatever, and you land in Vienna. And when you check in Frankfurt, you get your rail ticket and you get your plane ticket on the same ticket. So when you get to your destination, you just show that ticket at the train station and you jump on the train. And again, what they're saying is, why can't you have that from flying into the cruise industry? So why can't your face be your ticket for the flight and the cruise? Why can't you then go through a biometric gate at the cruise terminal and you link the journey for a passenger from the airport to the cruise, and their bag, for example, is checked in at the airport and it turns up in their cabin?
Yeah, a lot of things that you can draw on here. Just like sort of wrap this up, we could go on for a really long time. So if I was going to come back and talk to you in 3 years' time, and that doesn't mean I don't want to talk to you for 3 years, but just taking that as a time frame, if we came back and talked to you in 3 years' time, where would you expect all this to be with SmartSea and all the things we've been talking about?
Well, every part of me wants to say to you, we're going to be in this utopian environment in 3 years and everything's going to be digitalized, just standardized, and we're all going to be talking with each other. And the reality is that isn't going to happen. So I think I need to wind my proverbial neck in a little bit on that. But I think where we might be in 3 years, or where I'd like to be in 3 years, is, have we managed to communicate the long-term vision? Have we managed to start bringing some of the stakeholders together from the industry that can start to make that happen? Now, whether that's another 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, I don't know. But have we managed to engage the right people that are starting to talk about how we can do this? So that would be one element. The second element would be, have we set up a business which is adding immediate value into different segments of the maritime sector? So can I give you proof points of where we have added value into the cruise industry through some of the cruise operators? Have we managed to install biometric smart gates at some of the cruise terminals in Europe or Asia or the Americas? Are we improving connectivity and cybersecurity on board cargo ships? Have we developed a new management platform which is better than what the vessels have at the moment? I think I would judge myself based on saying yes to some of those questions. So if we talk in 3 years, I'd like to give you proof points of where we've been successful in adding value into those key segments of the maritime industry. But also, the big picture for me is, yes, we now have the right people together in a committee led by, for example, the IMO, and we're talking regularly about standardization and technology and leveraging SITA's knowledge and know-how. So that's where I'd like to be in 3 years.
Great, and we look forward to covering your progress on Seatrade Maritime News. It's been really fascinating talking to you today. Thank you, Julian, so much for taking the time to talk to our listeners today.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. And I hope it's not 3 years. I hope we get to see each other before then. But yeah, thanks to all those that are listening, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Julian. And yeah, certainly I hope to speak to you before 3 years. Well, that was just a nice time frame to put to that. That's all we have time for on this episode of the Seatrade Maritime podcast, and we look forward to joining you on the next episode.